Thank you for inviting me to speak at the third annual AI for IA conference. I will be talking about the use of artificial intelligence by law enforcement, specifically examining how algorithmic bias affects outcomes in bail and sentencing. I'm Nikki Pope, and I'm the Senior Director of AI and Legal Ethics at NVIDIA. I'm also the co-founder and president of the Pruno Fund, an organization that provides emergency funding for people who have been wrongfully convicted and exonerated from prison. Prior to joining NVIDIA, I ran the High Tech Law Institute at Santa Clara University, where I became interested in the use of artificial intelligence in sentencing and bail decisions. The goal of impartiality has led many in the law enforcement community, to believe in the promise of artificial intelligence as an objective factor in making decisions about a person's freedom. The hope has been that using predictive algorithms to assist judges can reduce or eliminate bias in sentencing and bail decisions. In the United States, the reality is that bias is so deeply embedded in our criminal justice system, the data derived from this system is also biased and cannot be removed. For this talk, I'm going to focus on racial bias, but the criminal justice system suffers from gender bias as well. At its core, an algorithm recognizes patterns in the data used to train it, even patterns that we as humans cannot see or are unaware of. Then the algorithm recognizes those patterns in the data it's analyzing. For a predictive algorithm, this means looking for patterns that suggest whether a certain activity or behavior will come to pass. This is especially problematic with law enforcement in the United States because much of the history of law enforcement in the United States is based on criminalizing the behavior of Black people. In the aftermath of the American Civil War, Southern states enacted laws that would criminalize the behavior of Black people, even though those same actions were not criminal if a white person did them. The objective was to control former slaves through restrictive laws called Black Codes and policing to enforce those laws. For example, by law, a Black man was not allowed to quit a job or to take a job other than as a farmer or a servant. A Black man who did not comply with these Black codes, and there were many more than just those two, that Black man could be arrested and convicted. Since Black people could not join the police department or state militia, the Black codes were enforced by all white police departments. The Black codes were insidious. A Black person could not testify against a white person or serve on a jury. If a white person committed a crime against a Black person, there was virtually no recourse for the Black victim. On the other hand, any violation of a Black code could mean jail time for a Black person. Southern history in the United States is filled with stories of Black men and women being arrested and jailed for perceived slights against white people. Because of these Black codes, more Black people were convicted and imprisoned in the South as compared with whites. According to the 1890 US Census, Blacks in the Southern United States were incarcerated at nearly 3 times the rate of whites. It shouldn't come as a surprise then that Black Americans began to leave the South in droves, heading to northern states seeking better economic opportunities in what has been called the Great Migration. Many of my ancestors left Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Arkansas for northern cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit. As Black people moved into these northern cities, the leaders in those cities looked to the South to understand their newly arrived residents. Unfortunately, the data from the South suggesting that Blacks were more likely to engage in criminal behavior than whites was also exported from the South to the North. The result of this biased data is that even today, Black people are more likely to be incarcerated than white people. Let's consider men in the United States. According to the Sentencing Project, 1 out of 9 men in the United States is likely to be incarcerated during his lifetime. That's pretty high. This is for all men, though. If you break it down by race or ethnicity, a white man is less likely to be incarcerated than a black man or a Latino. This pattern holds for women as well, with a white woman being significantly less likely to be incarcerated than a black woman or a Latina. With this history, you can see how race would be a problem in training data for predictive algorithms used by law enforcement. Remember that algorithms recognize patterns, even patterns humans are unaware of. Let's say we eliminate race and ethnicity from the training data. The algorithm can infer race or ethnicity from other information in the data set, proxies for race and ethnicity. In the United States, we live in racially segregated communities. While there have been some improvements in integration, there are still many communities that are predominantly one race or ethnic group. This makes zip codes a reliable proxy for race or ethnicity. So let's get rid of zip codes. Okay. But there are other proxies that the algorithm could use to infer race. The person's education level, their parents' education level, prior arrests of a specific nature, such as an arrest or conviction for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. We're now only addressing the sentencing discrepancies between crack and powder forms of cocaine, where crack was associated with blacks and had a higher prison sentence and conviction rate than powder, which was associated with whites. Okay, what about hobbies or other activities not related to criminal behavior? Type of job, income. While each of these demographic characteristics is not separately indicative of race, collectively, a set of facts about an individual being considered for bail could lead the algorithm to infer that the person is black. The algorithm would then compare that black individual to the biased group behavior and infer that the individual has a high likelihood of committing a future violent crime. In its 2016 groundbreaking article, Machine Bias, ProPublica exposed the racial bias in predictive algorithms being used by courts and law enforcement agencies across the United States. The article looked at 2 thieves, one a young black woman, the other a middle-aged white man. The young black woman had stolen a kid's $80 bike from his front yard. The middle-aged white man had shoplifted nearly $90 worth of tools from Home Depot. So their crimes were sort of similar. The young black woman had a prior record of misdemeanors that she had committed when she was a kid. The middle-aged white man had prior felony arrests and convictions for armed robbery. The algorithm used to predict the likelihood that either of these people would commit a violent crime in the future rated the young black woman as a high risk and the middle-aged white man as a low risk. ProPublica found that 2 years later, the opposite had occurred. The predictive algorithm had in fact been incorrect. The young woman had not been charged with any new crimes, while the middle-aged white man was in prison serving an 8-year term for grand theft because he burglarized a warehouse and stole thousands of dollars worth of electronic equipment. The question for data scientists is whether the biased data used to train predictive algorithms can be rehabilitated. In other words, is it possible to mitigate the centuries of historical bias baked into US crime data? While we think about that question and try to solve that problem, law enforcement agencies must be prohibited from using these algorithms in every situation where a person's life or freedom are at risk. In other words, courts and police must stop using predictive algorithms to set bail and sentences. The data sets used to train these algorithms are not impartial. The outcomes of these algorithms are not fair. The system is biased. Thank you.